Is Europe being punished again, or is the Iran war so costly that the United States has to save money by not sending troops to Poland as planned? The soldiers had their send-off ceremony. The equipment was already in transit, and then the order came, don't go. The US Army has abruptly cancelled the deployment of more than 4,000 troops to Poland. The unit, the 2nd Armoured Brigade Combat Team out of Fort Hood, Texas, had been set to rotate in for 9 months. This follows a decision 2 weeks ago to withdraw 5,000 troops from Germany. Well, Jim Townsend has been listening to all of that. 8 years as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence for European and NATO policy, 2 decades of work on European and NATO policy inside the Pentagon at NATO, and now with the Centre for a New American Security. We're blessed to have you for context and insight today, Jim. Is Europe being punished again?
Well, I'm afraid that's what it is. There has been talk, and for a long time, actually, there had been talk about moving forces around because the front line had changed from the Cold War days. Germany was no longer the front line. It was Poland, it was the Baltics, and there was talk about that. But it was something that conclusions hadn't been drawn yet. And this was a few years ago. But I think right now, these rotations date from when the Russians went into Crimea. So that's 2014, and we began to rotate in these Armor Brigade combat teams. So this rotation has been going on for a number of years now, and so something like this, this wasn't in the books. This was, I'm afraid, a sudden decision, probably made to placate Trump, and it's surprised everyone, the U.S. Congress and the Army itself.
Before we go much further, Jim, let's have a listen to the Polish PM Donald Tusk and how he interprets this move not to send troops to Poland as planned.
I received assurances that these decisions are of a logistical nature and will not affect deterrence capabilities or our security when it comes to Polish-American cooperation. Poland has been, is and will continue to be the most stable, loyal and effective ally of both the United States and other NATO countries. I am convinced we will be able to work together on this today and in the future.
Right, Jim, your reaction to the words of Donald Tusk, if we are making the argument that this is not an elaborate punishment for Europe, it does seem harsh on Poland, does it not? They have been the model citizens, according to what Trump himself wanted, scaling up the military, a massive increase in defence spending. How do you see it? How do you listen to Tusk?
Well, you're exactly right. That was part of the surprise here in Washington, was that it was Poland, that took the hit. And so which showed, I think, the chaotic nature of this decision, one hand not knowing what the other hand is doing. And I think for President Tusk there, I think he was putting a happy face on it. I think he's being cool. I think he's probably hoping that cooler heads will prevail and maybe this will be turned back on. I don't think he wants to upset this relationship that they have. The bilateral relationship between Poland and the U.S. has always been pretty strong. So I think he's got a lot of things at play here that he doesn't want to have damaged by reacting, particularly overreacting to something. And I think I would imagine behind the scenes, the Poles are calling the Pentagon and the White House particularly and saying, hey, what do we do? What are you doing? Can't you turn this around?
We do get to a pretty interesting fork in the road for this story, though, Jim. If it's not the latest punishment, so why do it? Is the Iran war, is there a method of thinking here that the Iran war is so costly that this is getting to the point of applying pressure to the United States, to the point where they have to save money by not sending troops to Poland? Is there a possibility that's in play here?
Probably not. But I think your general point, though, is a good one, which is, so what is the cost that's being paid by having this war with Iran in terms of the military forces? We know that they've had to move Patriot units out of the Indo-Pacific, and I think probably out of Europe, too, to reinforce air defense around the Gulf area. And so there's some logistics for you in terms of things having to move. I think in terms of funding, though, I don't think, having worked these rotations and things in the past, I don't think that there is a big savings there, because these troops were not permanently deployed in Europe. They're going to rotate in and rotate back. So now they're not going to be, in place in Europe. They're going to go back to Fort Hood. So there's still going to be salaries paid and expenses, operations and maintenance costs, So there's not big monies that can be saved by doing this. In fact, it could be more costly because now they're going to have to very quickly turn around and move back and turn those ships back and whatever. And I think there's probably a cost with that too. So if this is going to be saving money, I think they probably need to look elsewhere. I think this is punishment.
Yeah, fair enough. So we've ruled out the financial side. So we turn back to the boss, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, who's been consistent, Jim, about how he talks about the US's role in NATO and the European role as we go forward. Here he is now, some days ago, discussing the spending required by all in NATO.
At the NATO summit in The Hague last year, allies agreed to commit 5% of GDP to defence. Cash is crucial. But this year's summit in Ankara will also be about combat-ready capabilities and significantly scaling up our defence industries. NATO is and will always be a transatlantic alliance. But we need a stronger Europe in a stronger NATO through increased defence spending and defence production. And with European allies taking more responsibility for their own conventional defence backed by American power.
Jim, without sounding too alarmist, no matter how this particular decision is sold by Tusk or Rutte or anyone else, does part of you not wonder if a complete withdrawal from NATO is possible under Trump?
Well, that has always been, that's always been something that you talk about at cocktail parties and at dinners here around Washington is, are we actually going to pull out completely? And I guess I come down to the point where I think he would have already done that if he was going to do it. I think he likes to get people upset by making it sound like he is going to leave. He feels that's some leverage for him over the allies. He can say, if you don't do 5%, I'm going to leave. If you don't do this or do that, if you don't have more of the burden shifted to you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then we're going to leave. So I think if we did leave, then that's a lot of leverage that he loses. And I think he gets some enjoyment, frankly, of seeing a lot of U.S. Democrats running around clutching their pearls, as we say, when he says something like this. I think he gets some political jollies out of this. So I don't think he's going to leave. I think he's going to stay put, but he's going to be hard on the allies. And there's, frankly, in terms of burden shifting and what the Secretary General said, that does have to happen. Germany, frankly, has been one of the best allies in terms of putting money into the military, doing a lot of things that I think the U.S. has asked for years to happen. And certainly Germany is doing that. So there's a good story for Germany to tell at the Ankara summit coming up. But I think the SecGen is going to be riding everyone hard. And if Trump shows up at the summit, he might not. I think he's going to have some harsh words there as well. I think he likes doing that.
Yeah, it's really interesting to get your thoughts on that, because it is possible, and a lot of people feel it over here, that the writing is on the wall to some extent, that if someone keeps telling you who they are, you have to eventually believe them. What do you say to people who might be wondering, on that point that you make, does the United States really need NATO? And maybe more importantly, do Trump and Hegseth think that the United States really needs NATO?
Well, I will tell you that having worked with NATO and U.S. national security for decades and decades and decades, all the wars, all the stuff that we've had to do, we need NATO, we need allies, we need bases, we need to have the kind of relationship that we had during Desert Storm. During Afghanistan, Iraq, where allies were helping us out. We do need that. With the Hegseth and with Marco Rubio, quite frankly, as well as with the president, they don't understand that relationship between the U.S. and NATO, the U.S. and allies, and what we get out of this, the United States, and how this makes us stronger, having these friends and allies. You hear them talk about this, and you hear them just not understanding NATO. You hear Marco Rubio thinking that we have bases in Europe and because of NATO, that they're NATO bases. And that's why we're in NATO, is to have these bases. They're just two separate things. So they don't have a grasp of NATO and of alliances and how we help each other. And because they don't, they are much more cavalier about talking about leaving than other presidents or secretaries of defense have ever been. And so it's discouraging, frankly, but we keep trying to correct the record. But this is more ignorance than anything else.
With that in mind, Jim, I just want to flip this around to see it from the European angle and get a perspective of and get a look at where the biggest concentrations of US troops in Europe are right now. The largest by far is in Germany. I know you know this, but for my benefit and then everyone watching, around 38,000 in Germany, then Poland and the UK at roughly 10,000 each. Italy at around 12,000 troops and a few thousand more in Romania, Spain and Turkey. A lot of people clearly understand the importance of American forces here. I think there are a lot of people, though, who might offer to drive the Americans to the airport at the moment because it is getting so problematic for them. How many years before Europe is actually able to do, and this is just wondering, from that point of view, how many years before Europe would actually be able to go without the United States as they've been building through and building up their defence forces?
Well, in terms of conventional forces, so we'll leave the nuclear things aside.
Right.
But in terms of conventional forces for the alliance, the European members of the alliance, to reach a state where they can provide the kind of capabilities the U.S. has been providing, the betting number has been at least 10 years. And so, but you'll hear someone else say, yeah, but we don't have 10 years. If the Russians are going to, do something, it could be, well, the Swedes have said it could be 2 years, 3 years. I think the German chief of defense has also set an earlier date as well. So there's a real race going on between having an industry that can crank out what the allies need, and the allies can get the manpower together and everything else that they need. Can they get that together in 5 years? They can get some of it done. I think the German military strategy calls for a deadline of 3 to 5 years, I think, to get some core capabilities done. But really, it's going to take 10 years. And this is an important point, because the U.S., if we're going to be pulling forces out, we've got to give the European allies a transition time. We can't say, okay, we're shifting the burden to you. You're going to have to fill all the gaps that we will leave. And oh, by the way, we're leaving tomorrow. I mean, and so that's what a lot of us worry about, is not that can Europe do it, because Europe can. But it's a matter of how quickly can they do it, and can we do a transition that makes sense between U.S. forces leaving and European forces filling gaps.
Yeah, that lag time is all important. It was only yesterday that Mercedes-Benz, Jim, said they were contemplating going into the arms industry. That the headlines from day to day are just incredible. I wonder, as all of this is playing out, how do you think Russia is watching on to this step by step?
Well, I think Putin just can't believe it. I think he wakes up every morning and looks at the headlines and says, I haven't done a thing. And look, I'm getting everything I wanted, I think, if anything, he's got a crisis in terms of what should I do? I've got this window of opportunity. I've got Trump in the White House. I've got the Europeans. They're not there yet in terms of rearming. I've got the NATO at a maximum time of weakness here. If the U.S. particularly continues to draw forces out and Trump continues to make nice noises towards Moscow, he's probably worried that he's going to miss his opportunities trying to figure out what he should do. But honestly, not being flippant about it, I think that he is looking on this and trying to figure out how he can, take advantage of it. I don't think he's going to send tanks through the Fulda Gap into Germany and the old Cold War things, but I think there are things that he wants. We know he wants the Donbas and Ukraine for sure. We know he wants to show NATO and embarrass them and show them as a paper tiger. We know that he wants a new structure for European security that does not involve the U.S. or NATO, for that matter. We know he wants to roll back NATO enlargement. So he has things in mind, and certainly he's going to look for leverage that he can use to try to get Europe if not just the U.S., but to get Europe to agree to this. And it'll probably fit in with Ukraine. He might say, well, look, I've got the frozen front line in Ukraine. I'm going to say I'm going to if you don't give me the rest of the Donbas, I'm going to take advantage of this leverage that I have, and I'm going to put pressure on the allies. He's going to take I think it was the Swedish Chad that said, the chief of defense, who said, I'll take an island there off of Estonia, and I won't give it back unless I get, he didn't say this, but I won't give this island back unless I get the Donbas. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to spread, scenarios like this, but certainly as he sees trouble in Ukraine, he's not seeing progress in Ukraine. But he sees that Europe isn't as strong as it could be. He's seeing the U.S. walking away a bit. Certainly, he's tying those together. So that might be something that is in his mind.
I could ask you a million more questions, Jim, to tap into your experience, but just maybe one more before we go. Just in terms of how decisions are being made and communicated at the moment in Washington where you are. You've seen other administrations from really close range. How do you rate this White House on functionality?
Oh, boy. In terms of functionality, in terms of how what we call the interagency, within the U.S. government that works on national security, which is the State Department, the intelligence community, the Pentagon, the military, how are they working together, putting together options to give to the Secretary of Defense, who then briefs the president and the National Security Council staff, who advise the president. That's not in play. And functionality in terms of making policy in the United States depends on and has always had this interagency process where the various players within the government put together options and tries to give the president and the Secretary of Defense their best advice. And I don't see that working. I think this administration is very much focused on loyalty. The people that they have in there, like Hegseth and others, they're there for their loyalty to Trump. They're not there to run an interagency process. They don't have political appointees underneath them that are running this kind of interagency process. I think they are almost sitting, waiting on top-down direction from Trump or from someone else in the White House to decide on what to do. I think a great example has been this sudden decision to pull this Armored Brigade Combat Team home. That was definitely not something that came up through the interagency because there wouldn't have been such surprise. But obviously it came from the top down. And so it shows a problem with functionality. And there's other examples too. But other administrations, Democrat and Republican, have run much better in terms of serving the president with the information and the policy options and things that the president needs to make good decisions. I just don't see that happening now.
I know I promised last question. Just one more. As you watch this unfold then, what worries you most? And is there a version of this story that ends okay?
Well, I think the version of this story that ends okay is if in the midterm elections, which are coming up in November, where we're going to vote in a new Congress, if we can have Democrats take control of the House of Representatives and take control of the Senate and be guardrails in terms of if the president wants to invade Iran, he's not going to have a compliant Congress the way he does now. He's going to have Democrats who are leading the Congress. They're going to be asking the administration, we're not going to give you money for this until you tell us what your plan is. Where are you going with this? There are tools that the House of Representatives and the Senate have that provide for a balance of power between the legislative and the judicial and the executive branch. And those tools are not being used by this Congress. And so I think things can end on a better state if we get our checks and balances in place and we can help prevent activities like invading Iran and other things that are not probably the best use of American military power, that the Congress can help us get back into balance. And then we're going to have new presidential elections and we'll see what happens then. But let's get the Congress back in play. And that'll be the best outcome, I think.
Yeah, like never before. It does seem like the world has a stake in American midterm elections. Jim, just fantastic to get your thoughts on another another day that leaves Europe wondering what the NATO alliance might look like in the very near future. Fantastic to get your thoughts on another consequential day. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Great to get the thoughts, Jim Townsend's thoughts on another troubling day for NATO allies as they ponder what exactly are the priorities of the United States right now. One for you to mull over as well. What will the NATO alliance look like by the time Trump's second term is done, given there is still 2.5 years to go? Bye for now.